Do you ever find yourself driving home after a Wednesday night or getting a text or seeing a social media update and you wonder what happened to that student who used to be all in? The one who prayed big prayers, who led groups for you, even talked about going into ministry one day, and now they don't even return your texts. And you know that the life they're living isn't the one God's called them to. Now, if you've done this long enough, you know the pain. And this episode isn't about bitterness or blame. We want to take a look at guarding your heart, staying faithful, and shepherding the students God has given you today, and having hope and comfort in the students for their tomorrow.
I believe that we stand on the verge of a historic moment.
You ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
I found pardon for my past, power for the present, bright prospect for the future.
If you talk to the average teenager of today, I know what it does to you.
That could have an unparalleled and unprecedented impact.
I've got a story to tell. Have you?
Well, welcome back to the Shaping Student Ministry podcast, where we believe every moment with students matters because every student matters to God. And today we're talking about something heavy but real. What do you do when students walk away from the faith? And how do you stay healthy, hopeful, and called in the middle of that heartbreak? And Ian, I was talking to, it is a hard one. We've kind of experienced that in a few ways. I mean, just doing ministry, the nature of it, as long as we've done it, these kind of things come up. These students walking away come up. And I've now been here at Rosemont for 7 years. And so my first little sixth graders just graduated. So it's a sweet time, but it's also been a time where I've seen some that showed a lot of promise who just have walked away and have not really re-engaged the church in healthy ways. So, the other night I was scrolling through Facebook, sitting there with my wife, and I just told her, I said, I've got to get over this. It is just so deeply hurt me that this student, it just has wrecked me to watch and see what this student has done and the way that they're kind of going about their life and the decisions they're making. And it's just been hard.
I think we got to frame this in a really good way and in a clear way. But I think that it's a bigger issue. It's a bigger issue than only looking at student ministry. I mean, this is something that's at the heart and the core of shepherding. And we were talking about this beforehand. How do we frame this in a healthy and beneficial way? And so I would tell you that if you feel this way, I think you feel this way because whether you're a bivocational, full-time, whatever you are, pastor, or you're a student ministry leader, and you are pastoral in your gifting that God's given you. God's given us a lot of pastors that aren't paid to be pastors. And so whatever that looks like, there is a heart for us, kids, students, everywhere in between, that people will walk away. And it is absolutely gut-wrenching and heartbreaking for us because I think sometimes the struggle here is that you want more for them than they want for themselves.
Yeah.
That I even think this can be expanded a little bit I think it can be expanded quite a bit for us as believers and as pastors, that when you have that person who you've poured deeply into, and then they don't leave the church, but they absolutely eviscerate you and are angry at you. I mean, those are things that they can either leave us more wise or they can leave us cynical and broken. And sometimes we even struggle that they would leave us, that we would abdicate a lot. Like we would just go abdicate and go, I don't even know what happened with them when we push them on. And I don't think any of those are the right place to be unless it's, hey, I'm wiser, I can understand that. And that's kind of a long answer to a difficult problem. But I just want to, maybe as we're looking at this is a completely natural thing. And this is why being a pastor's hard. And it's part of why we exist, is to walk through stuff like this.
Well, you and I've talked about before, like the problem of being a shepherd sometimes is sheep bite.
Yes, they do.
And sometimes it's a result of poor shepherding. And sometimes it's just a result of the nature of just being a sheep. And, I think in student ministry, if you're doing it long enough and you're doing life with people enough, you're gonna lose not just students this way. You're gonna lose leaders.
Yeah.
This way. You're gonna You're going to watch as you have deacons walk out of the church. You're going to watch as you have volunteers walk out of the church, and you're going to lose relationships.
We even talked about this beforehand. Sometimes we have this happen with pastors, with student pastors that we shepherd and love student pastors, and we see them walk away or distance or not. It breaks our heart on all of those levels, and I think that is the nature of loving people, and I think that you see that in how Christ calls us to shepherd like he does. I mean, we imagine that how many of us, even us, like speaking, do we break the heart of the shepherd that has called us to more than what we're living for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are difficult things. I mean, we can recall stories, and I think that we'll get into this, but it's even interesting too that there are some stories that we don't stay up at night, and we kind of expected them to go the way they do. There are some stories that we expected so much more. And I think that as we kind of look at some of the keys of all of this as a culture, and pastors across the board as well, that culture feeds this. We're not usually very mature emotionally in how we handle things. Like not as much as we would have been maybe 20 or 30 years ago, because I think that there's a lot more push from culture to swing to extremes.
Yeah. Well, we had kind of talked about that beforehand, the pendulum of swinging emotionally. We either tend to say it's my fault and we drown ourselves in shame, or we kind of go in the opposite direction.
Yep.
And we can just say, well, whatever, they're just stupid kids, and then ultimately kind of get jaded in the middle of all of that.
Well, you know what both of those things do as well? And I mean, and hopefully this is encouragement, but either one of those responses, it doesn't help the students you're leading now, and it doesn't help you guard against that in the future. So, because if you just talk, like I hear a lot of guys go, well, I've been doing it this way for 30 years. And I'm like, well, if you're still doing the same thing you did 30 years ago, then that's a fail. That's not a fail forever. That's a fail until you realize I should update some stuff. Or, you get to the point of people that just go, I don't know what I've done wrong. Well, you can't operate out of that shame and that brokenness. There's a healthy amount as a shepherd that shepherds have to be able to step out of the situation that they are in with their sheep.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of why we have community as a whole, and why we bring student pastors together in community, because it helps us go, hey, and speak into each other's lives and step outside of it. But
one of the things you say all the time, that quote from Lewis, is that friendship begins in the moment where one person looks to the other and says, you too, I thought I was the only one. And I think that we had a guy specifically in one of our cohorts reach out and say, hey, in part of the cohorts, if we could cover this, it would be really helpful. And you and I both were just like, yeah, we can certainly do that, but we just need to record a podcast on that, because that is something that, like, that's an immediate, like, this guy's feeling it, and we have the means to be able to record something and talk about it. So let's do it now. Let's not wait 6 months. Let's go ahead and get something out here. But also, I mean, before you and I do podcasts together, before any of those things, you and I are best friends. And so we're walking through, how do we love and serve our wives better? How do we love and serve our kids better? How do we love and serve the church better? And how do we love? And so, like, all of these things. And so we have conversations where I would say, I'll speak for myself, but there's times where you and I talk on the phone and I'm very emotional one direction, or I'm very emotional another direction, because of the community that we have with one another, that sometimes when my emotional immaturity can swing me to extremes, the community and accountability that we have as brothers in Christ brings me back to the middle, and we're able to talk. And so, man, if you're listening to this, look, God created you an emotional person, but not to be ruled emotionally. And one of the good gifts, in addition to the Holy Spirit and the scriptures and all those things that he's given us, to be able to be meek, as he says, be under control, is to be in accountability in relationships with brothers.
Well, I would tell you too, like anger. So emotions are meant to, and I think we miss this too. We almost think that emotions are meant to soothe us or to help us. Emotions are meant to inform us, so that when we feel something, like, and I'll tell you the best, I've had counselors I've connected with and professionals that always say that the Inside Out movie is probably one of the most psychologically adept movies that's been made in a long time, because it's just good in telling you that your emotions are not meant to rule you. They're not meant to control you. They're meant to inform you. And there's this, I think most of us struggle with this idea when we hit these moments of being angry. And I'm just going to tell you, anger, and guys will go, well, Jesus was angry. He turned over the temple. He turned over the tables in the temple. Well, great. How many times did he do that? Once. And it's like, how many times did he really get angry? And what people, and so when Jesus's anger would inform him of something, and when you see him frustrated with his disciples, then what does he do? That informs, hey, they're not getting it. I need them to get it. And this is
Right.
where, this is where I'm going to head. And so I would tell you, anger is a cheap emotion. And the reason it's cheap, and when we go to it often, it's going to hurt people, and it's not going to help us. It's just going to put us at the point where you can be angry all day long at people, and most of us are, because it is a much harder emotion to feel grief, to walk through what happened, and then to genuinely accept that it's not up to you, the decisions people make, but then to actually say, but what can I do to help shore up how I serve them? And that's what I think is interesting. It's not an either or. It's not either you screwed up or you did it right and they're not making those decisions. It's also, so it's not that, but it's also not saying that you can't control it, but also that you just have no hand in it whatsoever. And so I think that we can look at some of this. It's why Paul, I think, says in Galatians 6:9, if I ever got a tattoo, it'd be this tattoo on me. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we'll reap if we do not give up. And I think that it's the consistency of what we do, and tweaking that consistency over time. And the big thing is not to just be grief stricken. One of the best phrases I ever heard was control the controllables. So when you have these students, like, you can't control that student, but then when you say, okay, is there anything in the past that I have done and could do better? And could I do, maybe, because I think every year you should reevaluate this, but every like 5 or 6 years, I think you should reevaluate that season of ministry and say, how well did I do at sowing consistently?
Yep.
And I know we'll get a little bit more into that, but I think faithful ministry means, grieving losses without growing bitter, and refusing to check out because you can't control the results.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and so many times in life, we can't control the results. I mean, we just can't. I mean, if we could control results, there'd be no need for hospital rooms.
Right.
Or doctors, or any of those things. And I think to your point about anger, I was reading in James the other day, and what James says towards the end of, I think, James chapter 1, is he says that, anger does not produce righteousness that honors God.
The anger of man doesn't produce the righteousness of God. Yeah.
It just doesn't. And so I think you're right? So faithful ministry does mean grieving loss without getting bitter. And bitterness too. Bitterness too is just I think bitterness comes from just being emotionally immature and not being able to process things. But the reality of bitterness is, and I'll never forget this. It was a poster. I don't even know where the poster came from. It was the first church I served in. It was just on a random wall in a closet.
Was it a cat on a rope saying, hang in there?
No.
Cat posters, man.
But I need to see that poster. No, this one was a rat and a bottle of cyanide. And it said, bitterness is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
And so bitterness is just when we are immature.
Yeah, I think it is. And to maybe to frame that too, it is immaturity, but sometimes it's almost it can be arrested development. It can be just because we're missing what's most important. And that's kind of, we split this podcast, not that it matters for you, but for us, into 3 or 4 sections. And one of these is just being able to say, this is what it is. It's grief. It's difficult. It absolutely should hurt. It does hurt. But how do you respond to it and walk through it? Because here's what I think. I think that there are so many, pastors, because pastors are just people. We're people who God's called to shepherd. And so
when you used to have a shirt, you made a shirt once, said pastors are people too.
I still have it on my mug.
Look at that.
But I would tell you, it's not mirrored right, so I don't know. I haven't mirrored my camera. But I will tell you that in the midst of all of this, for us as believers, I think it's important that we pastors struggle to be in pain and then to just stay in pain. And so I think that part of that maturity is not even that you feel like, some of us say, well, I can't, if I feel things, that's an issue. I think when you deeply feel things, it's a good sign. I think then what you've got to move into is, okay, so now that I'm feeling this, so like you and I were talking about, John, when you get on social media and it's just a constant pain to you. I expected people to either carry my pain with me for when they felt that, or I expected that somehow I could now go out and fix things with them. And the truth is, I can't.
Yeah.
And so that grief has got to come with trust, and then with evaluating our obedience and what sometimes God's going to let you see students who are broken because you need to change a few things in what you're doing. It doesn't mean it's your fault that they're broken. They make their own decisions, but maybe there are things that you need to highlight and to see. On the other side of it, when you talk about bitterness ends up becoming, and this is the thing we want to keep you from, grief unattended becomes bitterness. And so if you want to be, when you're working through grief, when you become bitter about that because you're not willing to trust God and to work and then to let it go and say, God, I got to give this to you, and I got to keep pushing it back to you. When you become bitter, that idea in Hebrews of bitterness, it's a root of bitterness. That means because whatever gets sucked in by the root affects everything else that happens. And the problem is you're going to have 6th grade students paying for a college kid that was in your ministry's mistakes.
Yep.
And that will
I've
everything.
experienced that in other ways. Like I know that, and I didn't realize it, but I had a former student of mine from a ministry in Nashville came down and led for me a couple years ago. And the students were asking the leader, like, what was it like? What was John like then? He didn't have kids, blah, 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 blah. And so the volunteers started telling the kids, like, well, we used to do this, and John used to do this and all these different things. And when Kristen and I debriefed with the leader, her name's Shelby, when we debriefed with them at lunch, she said, hey, I need to talk to you about this. I said, okay. And she said, the kids were asking me about you and, the things that we used to do at our church and the things you used to do with us and blah, blah, blah. And they said, John doesn't do any of that with us. And she said, why? She said, those were things we loved about you. Why have you stopped? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. And so it hit me. All of a sudden, it hit me when I was riding home. I said, I didn't even realize that I have withheld myself from a lot of students for something that happened to me, something that happened to us when we lived in Nashville, with the way that ended and how hurtful that whole situation was, that I withheld part of myself from my students for years because I didn't want to get too close, because I didn't want to get hurt again. And I think that I'm saying this from experience, don't hold other people accountable for something they didn't do.
Yeah.
The reality is too, and Ian, you can speak to this, like if a kid has perfect attendance, you see them 8 times a month. So there's 31 days in a month, 30, 31, sometimes 28.
Yeah.
You see them maybe 8 times if they're perfect attendance. I don't have any students really that are perfect attendance. So let's just say 4 times a month if they're really good.
Right.
So that's where you can be like, well, then what do I do? If you're not careful, well, then what I do doesn't matter. But I think what should drive us to is, no, what we do matters a lot every time the door's open. That's why we have to be so on it when it comes to them being in the building.
And you've got to draw. So, I wanted to say this, but it's not going to go well. And it's not going to go well because I don't think that it's fully true. But I want to bring up the examples and bring a greater truth. I knew a student pastor who had such a hard time leaving a student ministry, and it wasn't because somebody did something wrong, but in leaving the ministry, he and his wife said, we're never getting this close to the students again because we can't handle leaving them. And I want to say, I think that's wrong, or that, you shouldn't do that. And maybe for me, that would be, I don't know if it was the wrong move for them. I think that, but I would push you that you need to come up with correct boundaries for how you do student ministry. Kids don't need to always run your schedule. You've got to be able to say, I love you so much that I'm taking care of my family here, that I'm doing this. So your life doesn't need to be run by that. And so you've got to be able to have those boundaries. But I think that the key in all of that is that as we're discipling students and we're doing this, that we would choose the things that we do based off of what we know God has called us to do and what is right, not off of a reaction to somebody else hurting us. And the point is, what I think is the overarching principle that's good is that I've walked through a lot of church hurt. You've walked through church hurt. I walked through it for 15 years with several churches in a row. Like, it's just crazy. And I remember, and I still struggle to hear the voices of some of those people in my head, things that were just ridiculous and that they would say and do. And I had this conversation with my sister who's been through some of the same stuff. And she just said, I've had a lot of similar experiences. And I had to ask myself the question, when I get to heaven one day, if Christ asks me, and because I'm assuming it'll just be understood, but if Christ were to ask me what I did, am I comfortable with him saying, why did you not do the things that I was calling you to do because of these people? Like, why is it that the words of these people were so much more than me? And I would tell you this, with the people that leave, and it breaks your heart, and those that you grieve, whether it's somebody walked away, which is what we're mainly focusing on, or it's others, you need to ask the question, are those things going to be more powerful in your life and in your actions than the voice of God, and in figuring out how you do it? And which I think brings us into that second kind of section that we have of, so once that does happen, how do we shepherd through that disappointment?
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, like, hearing that, like, of course, I don't want those voices to be stronger than the Lord, And so I think objectively, yeah, the Lord's voice is more important. It's the same thing. It's the same thing when I hear about couples that divorce. Mm-hmm. Divorces don't come from healthy marriages. They just don't. Cheating doesn't come from a healthy marriage. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of something that is broken. And if you were to try to land the plane here, because I think it's a little too far, so I'm going to move the plane a little bit. There's a specific
weird waters. Yeah.
There's a specific instance I'm thinking of where this couple was kind of teetering back and forth with divorce, and the wife's kind of threatening it, and the husband's dealing with some significant addiction issues. And I just asked the wife, I said, look, do you believe your husband loves you? She said, absolutely. I said, but do you view alcohol as the woman he's cheating on you? And she said, well, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I think. How does he not love me more than he loves this? And I said, but here's the thing. I said, it's a sickness. It's a sickness, and it is something that is controlling him. And if he were to look at it on paper, I don't want to speak for him, but if he were to look at it on paper, I don't think he would just choose, I want to love alcohol more than I want to love my wife. That's not what people do, but that is exactly what people do.
Yep.
It's exactly what people do.
It's that need for objectivity that we find either in community or we find in hard prayer of saying, I need to, like, because you don't, it's, you always say, well, but what if? But the truth is, if you can be objective with us as we push, because we're actually doing this podcast, one episode, no behind the wall. We just wanted to be on. We'll explain why at the end. But I think that at the end of the day, if you can step out, like you're saying, and look at it on paper and go, okay, I know that I can't be enslaved to this. I know that I can't let this inform everything I'm doing. I just know that I have to maybe either make course corrections or just trust and give God trust. Let's talk about shepherding that through disappointment. I think that there's probably one really good person to look at.
Yeah, I think you consider Paul.
Yeah.
Paul, and Paul lost people.
Yeah. He lost people that made bad decisions and people that lost their lives. And I mean, like, you look at the whole gamut of who Paul lost and didn't become cynical in the midst of it. And, and sometimes for us, it's just hard to be cynical about a kid who didn't go to camp this year. And so like, you've got, like, let's look at that objectively. And that's, for levity, that's kind of where we're at. But it's, because it can be, we can become, and sometimes I think we need to ask the question, sometimes we need to let go of being bitter about things because people really didn't disappoint us. They just didn't do what we wanted them to do. So there's a spectrum here of trying to figure out, where am I at? And there are moments, listen, I have adults to kids that I disciple and invest in, and to students every week. And I'll tell you, there are moments where I have to be the best thing I can do. And it took me years and years to do this, is to be able to say, I love you so much, I'm not helping you with any of this until you make a change here. And I had to learn that the decisions they made were not on me because I was doing everything I knew to do. But I think Paul shows us a really excellent, from Demas walking away to Hymenaeus and Alexander, who made shipwrecks of their faith. Paul doesn't get cynical, and I think he helps us. Maybe he did, and we didn't hear about it in their conversations, but in his writing, I think he helps us stay objective in what we do, right?
Yeah. Well, and you can think of times where Paul disciplined, but he always left room for restoration, which is a picture of what Jesus did.
The goal discipline isn't just for punishment's sake. Punishment's already going to happen one or the other. It's to see people restored to where they are.
Yeah. Well, I had a conversation with a youth pastor in Chattanooga 2 days ago, and we were just chatting it up, and he was telling me about this issue with a particular leader that he has.
Yeah.
And I said, well, ultimately, man, you've got to come to the place where like this leader does need to be disciplined, 100%. Nobody's doubting that. The easy thing for you is going to be to say, you just can't serve in this ministry anymore. That's the easy thing. And look, it might be the right thing. Sometimes the easy thing and the right thing are the same thing. I have found in 15 years of full-time ministry, not often are the easy thing and the right thing the same thing.
Very rarely.
Yeah, very rarely. And that's true in parenting. That's true in relationships in general, marriage.
Yeah.
And so I think when we think of discipline, we got to think of like godly discipline. How is that different from worldly discipline?
Yep.
Well, worldly discipline is I'm going to do something to you and be done with it.
Yep. You got to pay for it.
Yeah. Godly discipline is I'm going to do something for you. And what we see in Paul and what we see in Jesus and what hopefully we see in ourselves is that we're going to be leaders who are not trying to do the easy thing. We're trying to do the right thing. Kind of the difference we think about with niceness versus kindness.
Yeah.
That, you think about.
Nice thing. It's a nice thing to not bring up something controversial with people because you have a nicer time with them. But
Right.
It's not a kind thing to do.
But it's not always kind because you're leaving the truth kind of out of the equation.
Right.
And so what can you do to do something for people, shepherding through discipline?
Well, let's take some steps that Paul had. One, so Demas deserts Paul. In 2 Timothy 4:10, and Paul says, for Demas, he says, because he loved the world, this world has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia and Titus to Dalmatia. I think that it's interesting, like the first section, even in that moment, you need to name the grief. Name the grief that you have. Be willing to just admit, hey, are you mad because they did this? Are you mad because somebody didn't consult? Like if you name why you're mad, sometimes that can be the indicator between if it's stupid or if it's genuine grief. Like, I'm mad that this kid didn't, and then you say, well, I'm mad they didn't come. And then you can say, well, but they're not always in control of if they didn't come. Like I have moments when I do student ministry where I have parents who tell their kids that they need to be closer to God. And then the parents don't go to church and they don't let the students do anything for church. And their kids are begging. Their kids are begging to go to student camp and all that. But that helps me to know I can't control their home and I don't need to be mad at them. Like I used to spend so much time angry that students would not come to things. And then I started realizing, one, I didn't need to be angry because it wasn't producing righteousness, but two, it wasn't up to them. So naming, it wasn't always up to them if they could do it or not. And so naming that has a big deal.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things Paul doesn't do.
What?
Is you don't read that and think, well, Demas has gone to this place because I'm so terrible.
Right.
He's not blaming himself in there.
He doesn't internalize the blame. Right?
Yeah.
Well, but I think that because he knows, and here's the thing, if you internalize blame, if you say you're a failure in all these moments, you, in your mind, cut off the fact that that person is on a journey growing closer to Jesus and that he's the one wooing them, right? Like you would say, if you're just like, they've ruined it all, then all of a sudden I leave out the grace of God and I put instead my view of what it could be. And Paul, his discipline, it leaves room for restoration. Like when you see Hymenaeus and Alexander, and he's like, listen, I kicked these guys out. And he says, if they belong to the devil, then he's going to take care of them. But if they belong to the Spirit, they're going to come back. And I think there is a beautiful, hopeful, and needful optimism, spiritual optimism for us when students leave or when we have students that are making bad decisions. And I'm telling you, like I have a student now, I had a conversation with his mom, known them they don't live here. I've known them for years and years. And this young man gave his life to Christ, and I discipled him and a group of guys together. And I was really like, I was very excited about him. And then when he got into college, and even as a young father, he just walked away. And he wasn't even angry. He just walked away. And I've prayed for him. I've been there. It broke my heart because I went, what? This is one of my core guys. What am I supposed to do? And what's crazy is that he's gone through some really tumultuous times in his job that wasn't even his fault. Hardworking guy, loves working hard in his family. But because of that has started saying, I think I need to either get back into church. So and that's obviously not what saves you, but I think that this is a God calling him back scenario. But he's not a period. He's a comma. And there's this moment where we have to leave that open for God to restore his people. And I think we will lose moments if I go, gosh, he's gone and he's never coming back. His parents, brokenhearted, love ministry, love Jesus, some of my best people I've ever done ministry with. And they didn't lose hope. They just have stayed and prayed. And he's still in that moment of, I hope he comes back and is restored. I think Paul also, leads into that, because if you don't internalize that and make it about you, it allows you to never stop sowing. Right. And
yeah, because you just factor it in to the overall, like, just look at it objectively. Yeah. Like, yes, this student is wandering. These students are not. We just gotta look at what we're doing, and we change. Is anything that we've done, the way that we're preaching, the way that we're teaching, the curriculum that we're providing, all of the things that we're doing, can we do anything different, or do we just keep doing those things and doing them well? And if you have good systems in place, you just know. You keep doing it. And I kind of jokingly said to you earlier, yeah, it's one thing if you look up occasionally and you got a student that's walked off. It's another thing if you look up occasionally and all you students have walked off. Because then you go,
I would tell you,
I need a mirror, not a magnifying glass.
Well, you got to keep your context in mind. You've got to keep your number of students that you have in mind. You got to keep their family, like all of that stuff. When you really, because wise people can remove their emotions after they have them, can remove their emotions and then begin to allow the truth to inform that, because truth doesn't have emotions. It just is truth. And so, to case in point, I had a guy who poured into me and invested in me a lot. He was a minister. He had this group of guys that I had, that they poured into really hard, and I poured into a group of guys in a similar way over the years. But what I noticed was I heard some of the things they did, and I was like, that just doesn't seem helpful. That doesn't seem deep. It just doesn't seem wise. It seems like you're just meeting and you're hoping that by meeting, it just, as I grew up, I didn't see what's crazy is I think all of those guys, like there was probably about eight to 10 of them, with the exception of 2, all of them pretty much walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And like in astounding ways. And then I looked at the life trajectory of those pastors later on, and I noticed it. But I think, you should be able to look at that and say, okay, if I'm seeing this exodus from students and their families aren't the issue, and I'm not in a mainly unchurched context, and I'm not dealing with these, well, then I need to, without feeling, say, what do I need to focus on here? And how do I recalibrate my ministry and what I'm doing? And I also think it's important too for us, John, to ask the question, why are we grieving this student over the other?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's not an accusation. I just think that it's something to keep in mind.
Well, I think, and I thought about that, and I think that, number one, sometimes it can speak to the closeness that you have with some students that you don't have with others. Absolutely. I think that's a fair one.
And that you need to have room for that, by the way, that
you do.
If you're not training up leaders, that kids aren't going to have favorite leaders, and be more favored over you, then that's not a healthy ministry, because they're going to resonate with different people.
Yeah. But I think, part of it is, I think shepherds dream for their sheep. Shepherds have dreams for their sheep and what they're going to do and the way they're going to shape the world. And you get to know these kids when they're 6th grade or 8th grade or whenever. I mean, maybe you're only getting this kid in as a senior.
Right.
But you get to know them, and you see them, and you just hear, like, there's just so much potential in them to do things that can absolutely shake the world. And, all throughout history, teenagers have done things to shake the world, be it one of the disciples, be it King David, be it, I think James Madison was 18 when he signed the Constitution.
James.
Well, might have been either him or Monroe, but like teenagers have the ability to shape culture and shape the world. And I think sometimes it's not necessarily that you're grieving the student as much as you're grieving the future that you imagine for them.
I think that's true. I think that everything you said is true, but I do think that there's another side of that we have to be careful of. I've always been an island of misfit toys student pastor. I just get weird and different kids. And some of that was, and that's good, because I think 95% of us are like that. And I think the 5% of super popular, great athletic people, there's just not a lot of them. So you're in a good boat. But I will tell you, so from personal experience at different churches, in the midst of reaching people, I think we have to be very careful. I had 3 young black boys that were just excellent kids, and we were in the South, so that is important. And then I had a really rich white kid with great parents, and I'm the last person to jump on this bandwagon and try and push it. But I think it was important to know that these 3 boys didn't have a dad. They had a mom who was barely there. They came every week. And I had great college students who were pouring into him, and they started coming on Sundays, and they come on Wednesdays. And then I had this young man who, he and his sister Their parents were very wealthy, very well off. They were best buddies with the pastor. And I can't tell you the number of hours and hours of conversations I had with this student, whose dad and mom were there. And we would spend all this time pouring into him because he could not get whether he was saved or not, like whether he knew Christ or not, couldn't figure that out. And so I'd walk through him for hours and hours. And then I talked with his dad, and his dad was trying to go. He was telling him, son, I know that you are. And I said, no, you can't know that this is part of the issue. He's taking it off of you. But they were worth all of this time and all of this effort. And we were all about a church that was going to reach. We wanted to reach every person. We existed for those that weren't there. But when those 3 little boys that weren't rich white kids that they knew, when they would show up and come to church, and a couple of people complained that they were too loud in church, that became an issue of we don't know. I don't know if they can come back to Sunday morning if they can't be in line. And I said, hold on. And I said, listen, I'm not even I'm not being a culture warrior here. I'm telling you, because I think being a Christian means you're not being a culture warrior. It means you're refusing to let any of that stuff happen where you go, I don't care. I don't care your color. I don't care the amount of money you make. I don't care who you are. You belong here. There's no longer slave or free. And I just said, I don't understand. Because those people can't, and we don't have families in our church that are so accepting for you, they can't set and adopt these little kids on Sunday. Why can't they take care of them? But I can spend hours with this guy who won't even listen to me on how to help his son understand salvation. And it just broke my heart, because I look at it, and you want to know what? Both of those sets of kids, nothing like Jesus, not following him, not doing anything now. And so I think that let's ask the question. It doesn't always have to be so charged as what I just said, and hopefully that comes across more than the situation. But especially when you start reaching people that maybe everybody in your church is not excited that you're always reaching, and that's a good thing for you, there's going to be a push down on you to value others over others.
Yeah.
And so we have to ask why.
And you can just turn the Bible around and open the book of James chapter 2, and you can show them that James, writing to the 12 tribes in the dispersion of Israel, he is laying out for them this desperate plea to avoid the sin that is favoritism, to avoid telling people who have little, who are filthy, to go get out of their seat and move so that the person with the gold ring can come in, and to keep in mind that the Lord is the one who's judging the manners of the heart. And so that's a little free theology 101 there for you. But,
but I think are we grieving, to your point that you just said earlier, are we grieving outside of all that particular situation? Are we grieving the student or the person, or are we grieving some type of future that we had imagined with them? Or are we grieving something that we had hoped for us? Or are we grieving something that could have been? And I think that, when you look at Paul in 1 Corinthians 3, I think this is the win, is that if you could have been a good enough teacher to best Paul, like Apollos was, like he was so good, they're like, I think I like Apollos. In the midst of all of this, Paul just says, I planted, Apollos watered, God gave the growth. And in the midst of that, you don't see Paul going, well, maybe I couldn't have done this. Paul was so intentional about what he said that we should be doing ministry in the same way, where we can say, listen, I'm not responsible for that student. I'm not responsible for the decisions they make. I was responsible to be faithful while they were underneath my employ. And that's where we can tweak the faithfulness. We cannot tweak the decisions, because God doesn't call us to be successful. God calls us to be faithful. And those are very different propositions. And I think it's funny, in these moments, it's very telling of us. We don't take credit for the wins. We don't we know better than to take credit for, well, I mean, some of us do, but like when we go, that student's growing, they're growing because of my work. Like, we would think that sounds profoundly arrogant, but we don't think it sounds arrogant when we go, it's all my fault that 4 years after this kid left me, he made bad decisions and decided. Well, you can't have it both ways. You have to either take credit for both or neither. And there's a humility in that we absolutely look back on people that have poured into us, and we're thankful for that, and we love them. But we know that it's not any one of us who waters, it's God who brings the growth, right?
Yeah. And it's also, unfortunately, it's also easier for us to take the kids who walk away, who, if they had perfect attendance, you had them 8 times a month. But most likely you had those students twice a year, and that was because their parents made them come, or because it was a major holiday or a Disciple Now in a camp. Right. And so here's kind of the call to action for us. I think a couple things, you can just write these down, right? The first thing that we need to do as leaders is we need to check our emotional rhythms. What I mean by that is my number one question when I talk to guys who are struggling is what's your private devotional life and your prayer time like? Because I think that you've got to stay focused on the things of the Lord. Otherwise, your emotions are going to get out of check. And look, when emotion is high, logic is low. And when logic is high, emotion is low. And so I want to be logical about the things of the Lord so my emotion will stay in check. The second thing is don't isolate yourself from,
Yeah, that's huge.
you know, and that, look, I'm saying this from experience from a guy who did it for years without even realizing it.
Right. Because you can be fully
And
present with people, but fully isolated emotionally,
Yeah.
spiritually.
yeah, you can. And we do that in relationships without realizing that we're guarded for things that have been done to us or things that we perceive to be done for us, you know?
I'll even tell you that in the midst of all this, like part of internalizing some of this that I think would cause an issue. I had a student at camp this year that I found out had given their life to Christ a year ago at our other camp. And everything in me wanted to go, gosh, well, I haven't asked the right questions. I haven't created this environment. I haven't done any of this. But the truth is their parents are so odd about like what Christianity looks like and what all that is. That student, it was a huge deal for them to say that. And then it was just like, hey, I totally get that. Why? Because discipleship is messy and it's hard. And there's nothing I could have done differently. I'm always telling students to do that, but I was able to look back on what we do and go, yeah, I can't. That's just an odd scenario, right? It's just a tough situation. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, and I think this last one is the one that we talk about all the time, man, is like, if you worry constantly about the students who aren't there, you're going to miss out on the ones who are.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so just in this moment, recommit to the students in front of you weekly. Do that weekly. Every time the door's open, don't worry about the kids that are not there. Pray for them. Worry about the kids you got in front of you, and just grieve, but do it with clarity and not cynicism.
So I think as we're doing all of this, right, let's recap everything. Don't swing to emotional extremes, right? And man, I would encourage you from my side of it, be faithful. Don't worry about success. Sort the exceptions from the rules. You need to make sure that you're not. This is the idea of not making a rule for everybody based off one person, right? And being able to say, yeah, this is the exception to the rule. And then, man, account for your context, your families, your real life, like as you're processing all of that. And man, don't try and find credit. Just try and stay faithful in all of that. And the reason that we didn't want to push this to behind the wall and do two parts of it is this. And if you're listening to it this long, thank you. And thank you for finishing the whole episode with us. I want to just encourage you with something. We usually put special, exclusive, free stuff for student pastors and student ministry leaders behind the wall with these. And then as we're talking, like, what are we going to do for this episode? We just realized, we offer all that. And so like, there's no reason to put it behind the wall. And we want to tell you, it's not a sales pitch. It is literally why we exist. That if we think that we're doing everything right now, then we're just lying and we're arrogant. And so our heart is that at $27 a month, everybody can pay for it. It helps take care of us being able to continue to do this. We want to challenge you. Get on there and try it for 2 weeks for free. But here's what you'd get. If you can tell me with confidence, and I know that 90% of the guys we talk to can't do this. So I'm just telling you, if you can tell me with confidence, I'm doing great family ministry because I'm reaching out to parents and families and giving students the best shot that they have by letting parents know what we're doing. If you're not doing that well, you need to be a part of what we're doing because we offer those tools. Hey, I'm training my volunteers well so that they'll be the best volunteers they can be, and they can be like mini student pastors for me. If you're not doing that 100%, we can help you get there. And because we got everything for that. 2, I'm in community with other pastors and getting ideas so that I can make sure I'm doing the very best I can do. Well, if you're not doing that, that's what we offer. And then 3, or really 3 and 4, I spend too much time on things that I could get, like games or prep or any of that. Well, we have all of those tools for you. And then the last thing that I think is most important, am I teaching solid biblical truth regularly that's intentional? And everything that we're offering to you, we have 3 years worth of studies right now. More's coming that you can use that gives you a connection to parents, students. It builds in investment in your leaders, all of that. So I'm just telling you, $27 a month. Paul said that we all deserve to be paid for with the ministry that we do, but we also don't want to gouge people. So we wanted to pick the best price we could in order to help you be able to answer this question so that in 4 years, and so when you see students walk away because of their own choices, you can go, Nope. I reached out to students regularly and well. I reached out to parents well. I trained my leaders. I taught what Paul says in Acts 20. I taught the whole counsel of God's word. And you can look back and do that. And so that's why we wanted to do 40 or 50 minutes on one episode and not have it behind the wall, is because everything you need is there. We would love for you to just try it out. Click the link below. It's shapingstudentministry.com/community, and you can sign in and take a look at all of it. But we'd love to partner with you on this, man. Nobody should be alone and have to walk through this stuff by themselves.
Yep. No. And you're only alone if you choose to be.
That's right.
So
we're here.
Yep.
We may not be male models, but we'll make you feel good and help you. I don't really know. I just thought Zoolander all of a sudden went in Zoolander when he goes, male models do a lot of things. They help people learn how to style their hair and how to dress. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. So I'm just going to.
I've honestly never seen it.
I know. You've never seen so many good movies, John.
I know.
We're going to make that happen.
It's a good place to end it.
Thank you all so much. We'll see you later.